I would love to have you each introduce yourselves and then give your opinion and thoughts about what we just saw, and we'll have a discussion as well. Thank you.
My name is Debbie Volk. I'm an attorney in Burlington. I practice immigration and nationality law and have done so since 1982. And actually 1987 I started practicing. And my practice deals with all types of immigration matters. And I have been dealing with families in same-sex relationships for years. And my reaction to this film is it's an amazing testimonial to courage, because as an attorney, my opinion would be just lay low and you can live together and fly below the radar, but to come out and challenge the system at a time when it was so unbelievably hard just is a real testimonial, and it's a wonderful thing to see. And my opinion of the film is it's an amazing film, and it's a very, very accurate portrayal of what people go through with the immigration system in many different aspects, and the hardships people face, and the way the immigration system doesn't usually recognize, or has a hard time recognizing, the people behind the petitions. And that was really pointed out very well in this film.
I'm Shelley Vermilya. I'm a resident of Plainfield. I'm a teacher at the University of Vermont and St. Michael's College. I've been part of this debate for quite a while as it's run through. You know, when we were at the State House in '91, they were so worried that people would move here from San Francisco by the busload. So, let's go! The more the better. Ah, they haven't arrived yet. I'm so sad. And it's fascinating to watch the history, the parallels between civil rights for people of color, the current issues for trans people. We still have huge immigration issues for the trans folks. So we're not done yet, and it's not done yet. And this is what keeps me very sober in celebrations, that the legislation can turn right around and slap us when we're not being vigilant. So this is what I try to teach my students, who they're traditional age college students now, don't realize that the AIDS pandemic was here in America. So we so swiftly lose our own history. So I'm thrilled to see this well-documented and absolutely loving relationship presented as an example of the fortitude of love. So few of us get to have 40 years with anyone. And this is a beautiful story. And then there's the beautiful you. We've been friends for a while.
We've known each other way too long.
At least 30 years.
I wasn't going to go back as far as chocolate.
Oh,
that inside joke.
I'm Keith Goslant. I'm from Barrie, and for 20 years I was the liaison to the Office of the Governor representing Vermont's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, Christian, queer, and allied communities.
We didn't have so many letters then.
I remember all of that. And I remember what it was like sitting in the back of a room like this, waiting for the person in the front of the room to use the language that showed they thought I might be here. So anytime a new community came forward with language to identify who they were, it was my obligation to use that. And for 20 years I used it training law enforcement. And I gotta say something about Vermont law enforcement, they got it. They understood. Those of you, we all look pretty much the same age. And I apologize. Remember the incident in Milton where there was an out student who was threatened at knife point and the school administration did nothing? The student wasn't supported until the Vermont State Police came in, and they had had training, and they said, you have an obligation to protect this student. Who would have thought that? I think one of the things that happened in Vermont is we had a very public debate. We stood in hostile forums and talked about the realities of our life. We stood up and demanded to be counted, and things shifted. People started hearing our stories and realizing they already knew us, and they didn't have to be afraid of us. And we kept building on top of each other. I remember the first year that I was around the State House, and the legislator sort of looked at him like, he's the queer liaison. Did you hear that? He was the queer liaison. And I remember the first public debate in our Senate where one of our senators got up and said, I oppose this bill because we were bringing in the era of the cornholer. And then I had to explain to people what that meant. But one of the things that, in building up what Shelley said, this is far from over. We built upon what we had achieved. We kept growing. We kept looking at what wasn't included, who wasn't at the table, who wasn't protected. If the Supreme Court rules in June in favor of same-sex marriage, and they will, there are only 19 states where people will be able to get married and still be confident that their jobs are protected because there's non-discrimination language that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. So the statement you heard about living in two closets or in two worlds, for a lot of us is still going to be true. There are going to be places where people can get married, but am I risking losing custody of my children? I can get married, but will I be evicted from my home? We are far from over. But the one thing, particularly here in Vermont, we found a voice. And there was a phrase at one point in time, the love that dare not speak its name won't shut up. And being one of those old-time activists, I have no intention of shutting up. One of the first statements, public addresses following a nasty hate crimes is, this is my home. This is where I grew up. This is where I intend to grow old. I'm not going anywhere. So we'd like to hear what you all have to say. Questions, comments? It was nice to be sitting in a room with people who you could watch this film and not have to translate it.
I heard a little booing. Bad things the government was doing.
I have a question. It's kind of a legal question, since at the end of the movie it said that Tony was applying as a widower. I did not realize that you could apply as a widower. So what are his chances now?
Under certain circumstances, and there's a time frame. So I don't know what the specifics of the time frame were or what they are under the current law without looking at the statute, but there's a time frame to be able to claim to be the spouse of a widowed, the widowed spouse of a U.S. citizen. And I was thinking, as the movie's going, I'm thinking, oh wow, if he dies, if he dies, then there's no basis for a petition in immigration. But then I was thinking, what a wonderful case for withholding, what they call withholding of removal or withholding of deportation, which is if, under certain circumstances, the government can use their discretion and not deport you. And starting with the letter and tracing the history over all those years. So I would think there are, if he's not successful on the widower petition, there may still be other avenues, but that is, what an amazingly harsh reality, that after all of this, after losing his husband, after living here as an undocumented person, which is incredibly difficult, especially now, and then his whole support system is here, everything he knows in this world is here, and then facing removal from the United States. I mean, you can't describe how unbearable that would be. And one of the things that I would want to talk about too is how hard it is to be undocumented in this country, and how the press has you believe that every person who's undocumented in this country just sucks off of the system and takes from the system. And in my experience, which has been considerable, most of the undocumented people that I've worked with, they all participate in giving into the system and working hard, and most people are frightened to death to ask the government for anything, because if they come forward, they're going to be targeted. And now we have that driver's license, which to me is just, wow, it's a really difficult situation, because what it does is it gives the federal government a whole list with photos and fingerprints and addresses, and unfortunately in my practice I have seen people be picked up as a result of that driver's license. So on some levels it gives you the freedom that you need to be able to move in society, but it's so frightening that you've just given everything to the government. And so it's not easy anymore to be undocumented. It never was really easy emotionally, but from a logistical standpoint now, you can't, Social Security Administration is tied into immigration now. Their databases are shared. So even though most people that I know who have been here unlawfully have paid taxes, now it's all matching up. So it's harder and harder and harder to live here as an undocumented person. It's a side issue.
Keith, can you talk a little bit about the history of gay rights and your involvement in the government as the liaison?
As a wealthy person.
We don't forget, we chased Fred Phelps out of town.
Yes, we did.
One of our more glorious moments.
We did a lot of stuff. Actually, the sort of history of Vermont was...
Fred Phelps?
Yeah.
Oh, Westboro Baptist Church.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. God hates fags.
Yeah.
Right, fags burning in hell.
Right.
Yeah.
Along with all the military personnel.
In Vermont, real political organizing started in 1985, and it was Vermont Coalition for Lesbian Gay Rights were what ended up becoming it. Prior to that, we survived on potlucks. I mean, how many times did I made the best fruit salad this side of anywhere, and you got a group of people together, and that was it. It was this informal social network. And what I would tell people is I grew up being taught the same stereotypes that everybody else did. And it wasn't until I found that community that it started getting challenged. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not who I am. And I'm really entitled to something different. And Representative Mick Glitman from Chittenden County was the first person who introduced the first bill. And I remember going to the first hearing. And we sort of all sat there very nervously, sort of, what's supposed to happen, and started talking about our lives. And it was very much as survivors talking about what you had just gone through. The more you talked, the more confident you came about yourself. And year after year after year, we continued to presence at the State House, and people started getting used to us. That first year I was it's the queer liaison over in the corner, and then as time progressed, they would start coming up and asking questions. Asking, well, what does this really mean? And how is this really a problem? And what I'll say, what happened here in Vermont that made all of that possible is while there was somebody in the State House that was talking with legislators, people in their districts were calling them and saying, I'm one of your constituents. This bill affects me. This is why I'm afraid to tell you who I am. And they started hearing it. I remember Representative Murphy, who was from Southern Vermont, whose vote we never had, who was one of our most vocal opponents. Ron Squires was elected as the first openly gay legislator from the Brattleboro district. And he listened while his colleagues debated our bill and got up and said, I've sat here, I've been your colleague for 2 years, and I had to listen to you decide if my life has worth or not. And Representative Murphy got up and said, he hadn't supported this bill, he didn't care about this, but all of a sudden, late one night, he got it. He said people were talking about people living in a closet. Well, what was so bad about that? And then he all of a sudden said, why should anybody have to live in a closet? And we didn't go away. I mean, we started by passing an HIV anti-discrimination bill, and then a hate crimes bill that came after a violent attack against a gay man in Burlington. And then the comprehensive anti-discrimination bill that had employment and housing and public accommodation. You couldn't get kicked out of your school. And then bullying in education. Your school has an obligation to protect you and to provide you with an education. Adoption reform. You're entitled to the custody of your children. You're also entitled to co-adopt your partner's children. Oh my. And then civil unions and marriage equality, and then all of that policy stuff in state government, working with the Agency of Human Services and working with the Police Academy, who in 1988 approached us and said, you're the new underrepresented community. We don't know who you are. We don't know what we're doing right. We don't know what we're doing wrong. Would you please come talk to us?
I wish they'd call us up about a lot of other things too.
Well, there we are. But again, it was one of those, we had people from within our community who were standing up, who were being visible. We were making allies, and it's one of the things that we absolutely have to continue doing is, if there's a demonstration on the State House lawn about workers' rights, we need to be there as lesbian and gay workers. Whenever there is something that is happening, we need to stand with our allies the same as we have asked them to stand with us. My fear, which Shelley has alluded, a Tea Party Republican becomes president. You've got a Republican House and Senate. You can start chipping away at all the work we did. We need to be telling our youth how we got here, what it took to get here, and what it's going to take to keep this. That's my condensed version. I have a file cabinet filled with...
But youth say, what's the big whoop? It's okay. They think this is the way it should be. They're not.
And they're right. But it's because that's what we've shown them.
But they're not necessarily voting. They're not necessarily having any confidence in the system. Where are they? And can we get them on the streets when we need them?
I absolutely agree.
I mean, this is my question. When they're all looking at me like,
It
oh,
borders
yeah.
on that open recruitment thing. You know?
I don't know why anybody has any problem with this, and I'm thinking, well, have you talked to your grandparents lately? Or, when they do come back from Thanksgiving, there's usually a lot of brouhaha at the table, which I support fully, but we have generations to talk to and think with and have embraced us as
And we
allies.
need to point out to ourselves and anyone else who's willing to listen, including our youth, looking at Texas and the PSYOP right now with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is the back door into repealing a lot of positive equality legislation. And we put exemptions into our statutes that if there is a business or an institution that is run by a religious order, that business or institution is held to the doctrines of that community of faith. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act goes a little further, saying that if you own a business, that you can run it according to your moral and religious beliefs. Oops. I have a little problem with that, because now you've tripped over to, I have the right to discriminate as long as I said it's my religious principles that I'm upholding. I still remember my dear sweet mother coming and testifying at one of the anti-discrimination hearings right after someone had testified saying really horrendous things about me. Well, I was the liaison and I was sitting right in front so people could see me, so that our community saw supportive faces, and they were pointing at me saying what an abomination, and my mother got up and said, as a Christian, I have 4 sons, and all of them are equal to the same protection and the same love. So, and she still is.
With a red hat and everything.
Her red hat, and she shows up at marriages where there's no mother of the couple, and they really want a parent there, and she comes, and she's one of those people that teaches you that the more love you have to give, the more that comes back to you, and it just keeps going on.
There's one observation I had about the film that I was a little bit disappointed at, and that was there was no reference to Vermont having civil unions and being the first state to have legal recognition of gay marriage. I know it was all about the couple and marriage laws, but I wish there was just a little bit of reference to Vermont. However, there is a new documentary that's coming out, and you might all know about it. I forget what it's called. It's about that civil union and gay marriage movement here in Vermont, and it's all about the Vermont history on that. And it's premiering in Provincetown pretty soon. It's got an email there.
Are you in it? Officiating?
I have no idea. I have film floating around that I wish would stay hidden.
I'm sorry, I can't remember the title, but it's ready, and it's going to be out there soon, so you'll hear about it.
We'll get to come back again.
Yeah.
Next
year's
the next
program.
edition.
I have a quick immigration question. Does all immigration law come from the federal government, or is there any immigration law that comes state by state? It doesn't seem like that would make sense, but I do imagine there are obviously state laws that interact differently with the federal
It's all
immigration.
federal, it's federal law. But where state law comes into effect is if you are married in a state where that marriage is legal, then the federal government will accept it as a valid marriage. And interestingly enough, it brings up transgender issues. And as I was looking at some of the legal issues on transgender relationships under immigration law, I realized that once immigration has accepted same-sex marriages, they have already started opening the doors to transgender marriages. And that if wherever you're married, and if you're in a transgender marriage and your state recognizes it as a heterosexual marriage. Immigration will in turn recognize it as a heterosexual marriage. Why this is important is because in many countries, if you come out, it's illegal in those countries. And if something happens in immigration at the embassy and you are denied your visa, you have to go back into your home country and you could face arrest. So things that have happened with immigration, which is just, it's a wonderful thing, immigration is addressing it so that perhaps you can have your interview at an embassy in a country that is more tolerant, so you're not at risk. And also that they are addressing these issues right away, which is very important, because in certain countries it's very dangerous to go to the embassies, even though it's the U.S. presence in that foreign country. But the examiner has the right to say, I just think your marriage is a sham. And therefore, based on the fact that you don't live together, you don't have joint assets, you don't have joint debt, nobody in your family knows you're married, you know, that kind of thing, we're going to deny it on that basis, and then you're stuck going back into your home country.
I have a trans couple married for many, many years, look to be as heterosexual as could be, but then say, we're more queer than we appear.
I don't know that about us, but
we'll never tell.
I know they can't hear nothing about anyway.
Shelley, you talk about the need to talk with youth, or youth needing to understand. How can those discussions happen, and where can they happen?
Great question. Well, I work with traditional age college students now, and they all look at me blankly and say, why didn't I learn about this in high school? When I worked with non-traditional age students, our age and younger, they did the same thing. Why didn't I know this history about the civil rights movement, about the gay rights movement, about the women's movement? I mean, we're missing all of this history. Somehow it slipped through the Bush funnel, and or whoever's writing the textbooks,
Texas.
we've been edited out.
Texas.
Yeah, we've been edited from the history books to such a degree that nobody knows the history. So I think we got to start with kids. I would love it if we could talk to kids about gender issues. I mean, they're some of the sassiest kids, and don't even have a clue that I'm a princess.
No, that was mine.
That would be your that would be your T-shirt, not mine.
Queen.
Oh, totally queen. Or skip princess.
There's Outright Vermont that had done outreach into high schools around the state, and I'm not sure how much access they're currently being given. So, you know, petition the Department of Education saying we should be included, and asking forums, people looking in their individual school districts, looking at your school board and your school administration saying, you know, I'm willing to be here as a mentor. I'm willing to come in and talk with history classes. You know, I'm willing to come in and talk, you know, psych classes, whatever. You know, I'm willing to share my story with you. Any class that's doing anything about political organizing, you know, this is how we were able to organize a community that really didn't want to be found, create public forums, influence the political process and legislation, and actually have proactive legislation pass. So even if you're a little uncomfortable with the subject itself, talking about the political process may be a way in as well. And I think we approach our communities of faith. I mean, the Unitarian Universalist Society is one of your sponsors for this forum. We approach the communities of faith because they all have youth groups. You know, what are those youth groups doing as sort of an inclusionary statement and participation in activities? So.
I can tell you specifically that Cabot and Twinfield denied me the opportunity to come in and table as a volunteer for Outright among the Central Vermont high schools. And the reason that they gave was basically that in the case of Twinfield, that there were children who were kindergarten or first grade age, and they might see the table and have questions.
And
the vibe I got was it was not the administration's feeling, but they were responding to the fears of parents.
Yes.
And so they said, no, you can't come in. Cabot said, we would like to have Outright come and do workshops, because with a workshop, we can have individual students get parental permission slips to attend the workshop. But if you were there with a table, every student could pass by.
Interesting.
And this is our progressive state.
I was going to say, years ago, my nieces were students at People's Academy in Morrisville, and they would do these big days of bringing all kinds of people in to talk. And my dear sweet nieces brought me in for show and tell. On several occasions, for several different reasons. And there was a very similar format where there was something that went home to parents saying, okay, this person is being invited in. This is the room I'm going to be in, this is the time, and if they wanted to come, they were invited.
And that is still the story at People's. When I called them, they said, we would love to have you come and table. However, before you can come and table, we must have Dana from Outright come and do a workshop. That has to precede your opportunity to table. Dana was out on, parental leave, just, having a baby, or Dana's partner having a baby. So that was, and it was therefore away for X number of weeks. So I haven't been to People's yet, but they've told me that I could come if Dana can first come and do a workshop.
And it sounds like when I was there was a slightly different scenario. I wasn't at a table in a hallway. It was a specific presentation. The students got to ask me questions. I acknowledged the parents who were in the back, and I said, you're more than welcome to be here. I know that you're probably going to inhibit your children more than you're inhibiting me, and my nieces will verify that. And if they have no more questions, I will answer some of yours, but this is their time, and they get to ask their questions. So it sounds like they've got a slightly different format now.
Well, at least there's a greater level of openness than some other schools.
The beautiful part of my classrooms at St. Mike's is nobody's paying attention, but I can, the one thing I know I can't do is hand out condoms. And I'm fine with that.
Actually, I did that at Twinfield. I'm a Twinfield graduate, so I probably should go out and say hi. I'm an adult queer, and I came out of your community and your school, so if you think this is something your students don't know about, guess what? They figured it out on their own. But yeah, you're just not giving them supportive, real information upon which they can make real life decisions that have meaning for them. It's our youth that are missing out. Because I'm sorry, I still remember feeling as though I was the only person in a room, not realizing that as I've grown older, there were 3 or 4 others sitting in the same room waiting to hear the same thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I have a question that, do you think it's the administration's perception of what the parents may think?
Right.
Because I have a 12-year-old son, and there were issues in his school that the administration just wouldn't touch. They're even watching the election, for crying out loud. Oh, we can't watch the election. We can't see, they don't want us to, we can't be on one side or another. And my whole point is it doesn't matter what side you're on. It's the election. It's the election. Right? You have to watch election so we're empowered, and we're going to change things. And unless we feel like we're empowered, and we teach our children that they don't like something, they change it. They get in there and they vote and they work and they get it part of the government. And so it was really, to me, it was an eye-opener, because it wasn't what the parents were worried about. It was what the administration was afraid the parents would object to. And you know, in our school system, it's such a wonderful community because families come in all shapes and sizes. And you know, addressing something that you had said earlier is that my child, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And on some levels, that is so wonderful. It is so absolutely like, Mom, that's, you know, that's your issue. That's not my issue.
So old school,
right.
Mom.
That's so 90s. That's so 90s.
You're fine.
I have to, on that note, I have to share a heartwarming thing that happened to me recently. I was asked to babysit for 2 sisters. And when I got to the house, they said, "Can we play Life?" People remember the board game Life. And in that
Capitalist.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
They said, we won't, can we play because our parents don't like us to play this game, right? But will you play with us? And I was like, you know, I remembered playing as a kid, so I'm like, sure, I'll play. And then the younger sister landed on the get married space, right? Which in the olden days, you know, if you were a girl playing, you took a blue peg to put in your car and you married a boy. And so the older sister turned to the younger one and said, "Nora, do you want to marry a man or a woman?" And I was like,
Was that written in the rules?
I was like, that was so great.
To just segue off of what Nancy just said, our youngest granddaughter was one of the flower girls at our wedding. And a few months after, we were talking about our friends, Jean and Tim, who got married in Michigan. And she says, "Mimi, boys can't get married." And I said, "Yes, they can. Just like Mimi and Edna got married. Boys can't get married." So she's in kindergarten. So that would be the kind of question that would come from a kindergartner.
That's no reason they shouldn't ask.
Yeah.
And we were glad that Jean and Tim finally made it legal.
Will each of you do final statements, comments?
This is
Closing statements. This is your bag.
This has been an amazing journey. From somebody who grew up here, I remember what it felt like at the beginning of this video where you didn't dare say anything.
Yeah.
And you didn't know that you were going to have a future. And you didn't know what was happening. And look at the amazing things that we have done as a community because we decided that our lives had worth.
I remember being somewhere with Bill Lippert and looking at him, we maybe just won civil unions, and I said, "Honey, we couldn't even dream of this as young gay kids. I mean, it was beyond our imagination, beyond our possibility to hope." So I'm going to keep hoping.
And my work is just beginning. And I'm going to keep working.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.